Hello YouTube, this is Sonic2KK here, and welcome back to the next video in our beginner series. Now, hopefully everything went well for you in the last tutorial. You've got your window set up, you have this, you can drag it around, you can't resize it, you can minimize it, and you can close it. So, you're probably thinking now, well, I don't really have a game. You promised me I would write games. I'm not going to have to go and break your door down and ask you, how do I write games, will I? And the answer would be no, and preferably don't do that at all, ever, to anyone. I'm going to show you how to write games, so don't panic, and let's get started. Well, to write a love game, you need to write what is known as a function, and a function is a piece of code that you can call or reference. You would write, whenever you write a function, you write the function name, you're giving it a name, and then you call that function, or you write its name, followed by two parentheses or brackets, whatever you want to call them, it's these things. And that will call it, and that will run that code. So if you have to do a lot of things over and over again, such as move a player, instead of having to do that in, say, 10 lines, you could do it in 1. So it's a piece of code that you can reference over and over again to do the same thing. So if you, maybe a more general example would be you have to constantly ask the user for input. Instead of having to constantly ask the user for input, write a function to do it. Instead of having to constantly check for collision every second, instead of having to write that, you could just write a function to do it, so you can write it in 1 line rather than like 20. Basically a way to save time. So to write a function, you write function, function name, two parentheses. These are for arguments. Arguments are pieces of information that you give a function. So if you have a function to calculate next week's date, you would want to give it the current date, so you could add the current date plus 7 to work out the next week. So like if it was work out my next birthday, you would want to give it some information about how it could work that out, some information for it to go by, because it can't just work out your birthday with no information. You need to give it information to help it work it out. But with love, we actually have some functions that we'll love today, but it's actually pronounced, well, it's pronounced love, I think, but I just call it love, and I'm going to be calling it love throughout the series. Just know love is love today, or whatever you want to call it, love, or whatever. I'm just going to call it love, and hopefully you will understand and be able to follow. Love has some functions already built in, and these are love.load, love.update, love.draw, love.focus, love.keypress, love.keyrelease, love.text input, love.mousepress, love.mousereleased, love.resize, and love.quit. And those are all the ones off the top of my head. And you don't need to write all these, but it's good to write all of them if you can. But for this tutorial, we're only going to focus on love.load, function love.update, can't spell, and I will go over all this in a second. Function love.draw, except for DT, I will probably cover that in another tutorial. These are the only ones that we're going to focus on in this tutorial. So function love.load, this is a function that love calls internally, meaning it calls it itself. You don't need to call it. Calling a function is just referencing it or asking it to run this code. Love.load is called whenever your window is created. So like before any updating happens, before your game updates, before anything gets drawn on your screen, whenever you draw something, it's like you would draw your player image, that's drawing. Before any of that happens, your game has to load. It needs to load in all this stuff. You need to load in your player images and stuff like that. Your audio, your awesome hero music, your golden coins of justice, all that sort of stuff. You need to load those in, and that's what you do with love.load. And love calls this internally again. So all you need to do is write them and write the code in them, and then love will call them. And if love doesn't find them, then love will define it itself with no code inside it. Because don't forget, we haven't defined any of these other functions, but they're still there. You can still register mouse input, but love still registers mouse input, I should say. But you're not writing any code to handle it. You're not writing anything that will happen when the mouse is pressed. Because if your game doesn't need mouse pressed for whatever reason, then don't define it, and there will be no code to be ran, and it will reduce your file size by a slight bit, by about 10 lines or so. Yeah. So love.load, it's used for loading things. Love.update is called whenever you want to update something. Now in game development terms, this means stuff like updating your player. Like whenever your player moves, whenever you press like the WASD keys or the arrow keys, WASD keys is just WAS and D, because in games that's generally what's used to move. Or IJK and L is sometimes used to move, or the arrow keys is a very popular one, and some other ones like T, F, G and H I've seen being used sometimes, but very rare in some very rare games. Spacebar is used to jump. That would all handle an update, because that you want to check for input and stuff, and this is called every frame. You may have noticed in games the games will run at 50 frames a second, or 60 frames a second, 60 FPS, frames per second. FPS stands for frames per second. It's called every frame, and a frame is just a refresh. Every time your processor does something, that's like a frame. Anytime anything happens in your computer, it's a frame. And generally, things will happen 60 times in a second. So if something is running at 60 frames a second, that means that 60 things are happening per second. 60 frames are occurring per second. And these LoveDraw and LoveUpdate are called every second, or every frame. And this is so that the drawing is constant, because if you draw something once and then stop drawing it, like if I were to draw something in the LoveLoad, then it would draw for like a frame and then stop drawing, because we might not even say it's like a flash, because it needs to be drawn every single frame. It needs to be drawn 60 times a second. It's actually drawing and then refreshing and drawing and refreshing and drawing, so it'll appear, disappear, but it's doing that so fast, it's flashing so fast that you can't see it, and it just gives the illusion that it's actually drawing. It gives the illusion that it's always there, and that's why you need to draw these and update every frame. If you have any questions about that, leave a comment and I will be more than happy to answer. And if I can't, then remember, there's always the Love forums, which is full of very helpful people, and you can ask them for help. So what we want to do is here, we want to say print loading the game, and here we want to say print updating the game, and I will cover what print is in a second. Print drawing the game, and you don't see anything right now, but whenever I close it, you will see all this stuff. Here you can see loading the game, it was called first, and then updating drawing, because updating and drawing happens in that order. You will update your player's position and then draw the player at the new position. Update it, draw it, update, draw it, update, draw, update, draw. You have to get that in your head, that you update something and then you draw something. Yeah. And what does print do? Well, print is something that will print something to the console. The console is like your command prompt, or what else? Terminal. Or in our case, this in Sublime Text, it will be this. This is our console. This is our console window. This is our console window. Hello, Sonic. Okay. I wonder why our console's talking to you. No, that's childish. Anyway, yeah, this is our console. Hopefully you get the idea. This is the console, and this is where any technical input will come out. Like if you're debugging your game, which means you're scanning for bugs. A bug is a problem in your code. Like if your player isn't moving when you press a key and you want it to move, then that's a bug. Again, this is the other basics, so I'll be covering the other basics. Print will print something to the console, not to the screen, to the console. So you could print hello user if they're running it from a command line, or any sort of technical input that you don't necessarily want the user to see when they're playing the game, but you want developers to see. Developers, of course, are people who are writing the code for your game, or you would be a developer. You're developing your game, you're writing it. The stuff that you would want to see, like whenever a key is pressed, you wouldn't want the user to see the console and have it say pressing the right arrow key, but you might want you to see that in the console just as a reference frame. And that's what print does. It prints something to the console, it writes something to the console. And print is a built-in function for Lua, and of course you need to give it information, which is a string. A string is something that is surrounded in either single quotes or double quotes, as it is shown here. And it doesn't matter what one you use. In some languages like Java, I think it does, but in Lua it doesn't matter. You can use single quotes or double quotes, just like in Python, if you've ever written in Python. Java and Python are other programming languages that you can use. You can look them up of your own accord if you wish. Yeah. So, of course, print needs information. It needs to know what to print to the console. If you don't give print anything, then it just won't print anything. But you need to say drawing the game. Because print needs to know what to print. This is a great example of functions that need information. Print is a function, and you need to tell it what to print. You need to give it information. I just need to get that in your head, because some people struggle with that. I know I struggled with it at first. Yeah. There we go. It's drawing updating again. So yeah. The next thing I want to really discuss is variables. Variables are pieces of information. They're like boxes in your code that can store one value. So I could say player name equals the great, player age equals 14. This, notice it is not surrounded in single or double quotes. This means that it is a number. A number is basically what it says in the tin. It's a number in Lua. So in Lua there are two, well, there are three, but I'll get into the other ones. But right now you need to know that there are two data types in Lua, and data types are types of information that there can be in Lua. There can be numbers, and there can be strings. Strings are anything surrounded in single quotes or double quotes. And here I've just decided to use double quotes, but again it doesn't matter. There are also tables, but I will cover that in another tutorial. Yeah. So player age equals 14 and player name equals Eamon the Great. So these are two strings. And then we want to say player gold equals 9,001, so it's over 9,000. And player XP equals 10,000, because why not? And these are all variables that hold information. You can't give a variable multiple values, and this is the variable name, and the equal sign means okay, look, we want to create a variable with the name player name. You don't need to use underscores. You can use anything. The variable cannot start with a special character, an underscore, colon, or whatever. It has to start with a letter. It can be capital or it can be lowercase, but you can have any of these weird characters in between the variable name, except semicolon, I think. There are some limitations. I encourage you to play around and see what the limitations are just for yourself. Try and use characters in certain parts of a variable name and see if it works. And then the equal sign means we want to give the variable player name the value of the string Eamon the Great. So we want to basically give player name the value Eamon the Great. And this saves us having to constantly write Eamon the Great, and we can just refer to it as player name. So it's like a shortcut. A lot of people like to use X or underscore X for junk variables. Junk variables are basically variables that will only be used once, but you can use local, which I'll get to in a second instead. So hopefully you understand variables. If you don't, again, I encourage you to leave a comment. If you don't understand anything in the series, leave a comment. I will be more than happy to help you, because then there's no point in watching the series if you don't understand it. I'm talking very fast. Yeah. So player name. Now this can be accessed in any file. Any Lua file can access this, and this means that it is stored in memory or RAM. So whenever you make a variable or a function, it gets stored in your computer for the amount of time that your application is running. Lua will remove things automatically, but I'll get into in a more advanced tutorial about how to clear things at certain times. And that gets stored in your RAM. So the more RAM you have, the more information can be stored, and that's why some games have minimum requirements of, say, 16 gig of RAM, or 8 gig of RAM, or 2 gig of RAM, or whatever. Although that's going down to like 512 meg of RAM. You should know about RAM. RAM is basically just you should know what RAM is. I can't be bothered to explain it. You should know at least what RAM is. So I've never met anybody that doesn't know what RAM is. So player name, this takes up a lot of space in RAM, because it can be accessed everywhere until the game ends. Whereas if we say local and we define all these as local. In Sublime Text, you can hold Control or Command and select multiple times to type multiple things in one line, and here we're going to make our variables local. And this means that once this file has been ran, this would be more useful than like a player file or something. It can first of all, it can only be accessed inside this file. So if I were to make a new file and call it like player.lua, and I was to write all my player code, blah blah blah, I'm a player, whatever. The variables cannot be accessed in that file, whereas before they could have been, and it means that they are local to this file. They are local to this block, and a block of code is basically just a chunk of code. And in functions, any code that goes inside a function, you can use either 4 indents or 2 indents. Lua standard is 2 indents, but it's up to you. Nothing's enforced. Just like in Lua, there shouldn't be camel case. There should be underscores and 1 underscore, and then the rest. Like if I were to write XP is awesome, I shouldn't use underscores. I should just write player XP is awesome, like I did. But you can use 1 underscore, and this is kind of like the Lua standard, just like 2 white spaces is. To set this, you can go into your preferences in plain text by going to here, preferences or Control, comma, or whatever. You look it up how to do it in your platform and changing tab size to 2, or by going into help and saying indent tab width 3, 5, whatever. And that will, you can select the code and then do it like if I were to say indent 4, and then the indent would be 4 by standard. But that's more complicated. You can explore your editor, Google some things about your editor, and yeah. So back to blocks of code. Blocks of code in a function. Oh, I need to change that back to 2. Yeah, so everything is 2 again. That's good. Blocks of code. If there's no function, then your entire code is a block of code. Anything you write in a file is automatically a block of code. It's a chunk of code. In a function, it's a new block, and if you were to write local x equals 10, you wouldn't be able to access it outside of this function before or after it, because once this chunk is finished running, then this variable is deleted from memory. And then you can obviously run collect garbage, which I'll cover in another tutorial to remove it, but Love will remove it automatically for you every so often. It will clear junk variables from memory. Junk variables are basically variables that are only used once for one purpose, and variables with an underscore are automatically deleted by Lua after a set period of time as well. So if something's local in your file, it's local to the file. If something's local in a function, it's local to that function, and so on. So in blocks of code, if something's local, then it means it can only be accessed in that block of code. And then if it's in a nested block, if it's in a block inside that block, blockception, it can only be accessed in that nested block. A nested block is just a block inside another block. It's like something nested means something that's inside something else. It's just like a nest in a tree. It's a nest because it's nested inside the tree. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions about local, leave a comment, of course. Like I'm going to stop saying that now, but if you have questions about anything, do not hesitate to leave a comment. I will be more than happy to help you, because that's the point of this, to help you learn how to write games. And yeah, so that's variables. Here we could say print player name, and it would print Aim in the Great instead of loading game. But if I were to write these, of course, in here, then here, and of course give them different names, because you can't have 2 variables with the same, well, I think if they're local in here you can, but I have messed about with that because it's bad practice to have 2 variables with the same name in the same file. If they're local in here, like if they were defined in here, then you wouldn't be able to access them anywhere else. Print loading the game. Yeah. So because since LoveLoad is its own block, if they're local in here, you won't be able to access them. So that's it in variables. Remember variables are just like boxes that can hold one piece of information, and they can have 2 data types. For right now, they can have 3, like I said, but I will cover that in a later tutorial when we get on to actually writing more complex code. They can have 2 data types, a string, which can either have single or double quotes, and numbers, which can be pretty much any length up to like 2.5 billion numbers, and then another 2.5 billion decimal points. So yeah, you can write pretty much any number you want, unless your player cheats and gets a really high score. Anyway, yeah, that is it for variables. That is it for this tutorial even. Remember, functions, pieces of code that you can just call. Print will print something to the console. It needs information on what to print. And then variables are just like boxes that hold 2 types of information, strings and numbers. So hopefully you enjoyed. Any questions, again, leave a comment. If you want me to cover something in particular, leave a comment and I will get back to you as soon as possible, and I will hopefully cover it. I will reply saying when and if I will cover it. And yeah, share with your friends if you think they would be interested in learning how to develop games. But that is it for this tutorial. My name is Sonic2KK, and I will hopefully see you in the next tutorial.